The poker table went silent when Thomas Paulson slapped his daughter's hand on the green felt surface, like she was nothing more than a final bet. Tessa Paulson had known her father was a drunk and a gambler, but she never imagined he would sink this low. The saloon in Mojave, California, reeked of tobacco smoke and spilled whiskey, and the 5 men seated around the table stared at her with varying degrees of shock and hunger. Her father's bloodshot eyes refused to meet hers as he announced to the assembled players that his daughter would go to whoever won this hand. She was 19 years old, standing there in her faded calico dress, and her entire world had just shattered. "You cannot be serious," she whispered, her voice trembling with a combination of rage and disbelief. "Shut your mouth, girl," Thomas growled, swaying slightly in his chair. "I am down $500 and I have got nothing left to cover it. You will do as I say." One of the men, a stocky rancher with a thick gray beard, leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "Paulson, this is low even for you. A man does not bet his own flesh and blood." But the others at the table did not share his moral reservation. A man in an expensive suit, clearly a businessman from somewhere back east, smiled coldly. "I believe the bet is valid. Let us see what you have got, gentlemen." Tessa felt her knees go weak. This could not be happening. Not in 1885, not in America, not to her. Yet here she stood, about to become the property of whichever man held the best cards. The saloon door swung open with a creak that cut through the tension. Heavy footsteps crossed the wooden floor, spurs jingling with each step. Tessa did not turn to look, her eyes still fixed on her father's cowardly face, willing him to take it back, to remember he had once held her as a baby and promised to protect her always. "I am in," a deep voice said from behind her. This time Tessa did turn. The man who had spoken stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty trail coat. He had dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and his face was tanned and weathered from years under the desert sun. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were a striking blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they looked at her with something she had not expected. Pity, maybe even anger on her behalf. "Yates O'Brien," the businessman said with clear distaste. "I heard you were passing through. Did not think this would be your kind of game." Yates O'Brien moved to the table, his gaze never leaving Tessa's face. "It is not," he said quietly, "but I am making an exception. You have got the money to buy in?" Thomas asked hopefully, apparently unconcerned with who took his daughter as long as his debts were covered. Yates reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He opened it and poured gold coins onto the table, enough to make every man present sit up straighter. "I've got more than enough," he said, "and I am raising the stakes. $1,000 says I win this hand." The businessman whistled low. "That is more than the girl is worth." Yates's jaw tightened. "That is where you are wrong," he said, his voice hard as iron. "She is worth more than gold. More than all the gold in California. But since you bastards seem to think human lives can be bought and sold, I will play your game. This once." Tessa felt something shift in her chest. This stranger, this cowboy who had just walked into the saloon, was defending her worth when her own father had thrown it away. She watched as he took the empty seat at the table, his movements controlled and deliberate. The cards were dealt. Tessa stood frozen, unable to move or speak. Her entire future rested on whatever pieces of paper these men held in their hands. The absurdity of it, the horror of it, crashed over her in waves. Yates picked up his cards slowly, his face revealing nothing. The other men studied their hands with varying expressions. The gray-bearded rancher folded immediately, tossing his cards down with disgust. "I want no part of this," he muttered, pushing back from the table. "Your loss," the businessman said, his smile widening. He clearly liked his hand. Two other players folded in quick succession. It came down to Thomas, the businessman, and Yates. Tessa's father was sweating now, his hands shaking as he looked at his cards. He had a pair of kings showing. The businessman had a pair of aces. Yates had nothing showing but a jack and a 10. "Call," Thomas said, pushing the last of his coins forward. "Raise another 200, the businessman said smoothly. Yates did not hesitate. "Call your 200 and raise you 500 more." The businessman's smile faltered slightly. He studied Yates's face, looking for any hint of what he held. Yates stared back, patient and still as stone. Finally, the businessman nodded. "Call." Thomas had no more money. He was out. The businessman laid down his cards with a flourish. Full house, aces over eights. It was a strong hand. Tessa felt her heart sink. She would be leaving with that cruel-eyed businessman, would be his property to do with as he pleased. Her life was over. Yates set his cards down one at a time. Jack of hearts, 10 of hearts, Queen of hearts, King of hearts. And finally, an ace of hearts, a straight flush. The businessman's face went purple. "You cheated," he sputtered. "No one gets dealt a hand like that naturally." Yates stood slowly, his hand moving to rest on the gun at his hip. "Are you calling me a cheat?" The saloon went dead silent. Every man present knew what that question meant. The businessman looked at Yates's cold eyes and apparently decided his life was worth more than a gambling dispute. "No," he said finally. "No, I am not. You won fair and square." Yates nodded once. He turned to Thomas, who sat slumped in his chair. "The girl comes with me. Our business is done." Thomas did not even look at his daughter as she was led away. Tessa found herself following Yates out of the saloon in a daze, her mind unable to fully process what had just happened. She had been sold by her own father and won by a stranger in a card game. The night air hit her face, cooler than the stuffy saloon, and she gasped as reality crashed down. "Wait," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, just wait." Yates stopped and turned to face her. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the stubble on his strong jaw. He was perhaps 25 or 26, young but hardened by whatever life he had lived. "I know you are scared," he said quietly, "but I need you to trust me." "Can you do that? Trust you?" Tessa heard her voice rise with hysteria. "You just won me in a card game like I am a horse or a piece of furniture. Why should I trust you?" Yates glanced around. The street was mostly empty, but a few curious onlookers had gathered. "Not here," he said. "Come with me. I promise I will explain everything." Every instinct told her to run, but where would she go? Back to her father, who had just sold her. She had no other family, no money, no prospects. At least this man had stood up for her worth, had said she was worth more than gold. That had to count for something. She followed him down the dusty street to a small boarding house. He rented 2 rooms, she noticed. 2 separate rooms. He opened one door and gestured for her to enter. The room was simple but clean, with a bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto the street. "This is your room," Yates said. "The door has a lock. Use it. I will be next door if you need anything." Tessa stared at him. "I do not understand." Yates sighed and leaned against the door frame. "Your father put you in an impossible situation. Those men at that table, they would have used you and thrown you away like trash. I could not let that happen. So you bought me instead." "I won you," he corrected, "and now I am setting you free. You can stay here tonight, get some rest, and in the morning you can decide what you want to do. Go anywhere you want. I will give you enough money to start over somewhere else if that is what you choose." Tessa felt tears sting her eyes. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Yates said simply. "Because you are a person, not property, and because no one should be treated the way your father treated you tonight." He tipped his hat to her and turned to leave. Tessa found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "What is your name, your full name?" He looked back at her. "Yates O'Brien. I run a cattle ranch about 50 miles north of here." "I am Tessa Paulson." She paused. "Thank you, Yates, for what you did." His expression softened. "Get some sleep, Tessa. Things will look clearer in the morning." After he left, Tessa locked the door and sat on the bed. Her entire body was shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. She had been so sure her life was over, that she would be brutalized by whatever man won that horrible card game. Instead, she had been saved by a cowboy who asked nothing in return. It did not make sense. Men did not do things like that, not in her experience. They took what they wanted and justified it however they could, but Yates had rented her a separate room, had promised her freedom, had said she was worth more than gold. She lay down on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling, wondering what the morning would bring. Sleep came in fitful bursts, plagued by dreams of her father's bloodshot eyes and the hungry looks of those men at the poker table. When dawn light finally crept through the window, Tessa rose and splashed cold water on her face from the wash basin. She looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Everything had changed in the course of one night. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Tessa, it is Yates. I brought you some breakfast." She opened the door to find him holding a wrapped bundle. The smell of fresh bread and bacon made her stomach growl, reminding her she had not eaten since yesterday afternoon. "Thank you," she said, taking the food. "You did not have to do that." "Everyone has to eat," he said with a slight smile. "Listen, I need to tend to my horse and pick up some supplies. Why don't you take your time, eat, and think about what you want to do? I will be back in a couple of hours and we can talk." After he left, Tessa ate slowly, savoring every bite. The food was simple but good, and it gave her time to think. She could take the money Yates offered and travel to San Francisco, maybe find work there. Or she could go to Sacramento or even try to make it back east. But the truth was, she had no skills beyond basic housework and cooking. How long would any money last? And what kind of work could a woman alone really find? The options were limited and mostly grim. By the time Yates returned, she had made up her mind. "I want to work for you," she said as soon as he walked through the door. Yates blinked in surprise. "Work for me? You said you have a ranch. You must need someone to cook and clean, do laundry, that sort of thing. I can do all of that. I am a hard worker. You could pay me a wage and I would have a place to stay and earn my own money honestly." Yates studied her face. "You do not owe me anything, Tessa. You understand that, right? You can just take the money and go." "I know I do not owe you," she said firmly. "But I also know that money runs out, and then where would I be? At least if I work for you, I can build something, save up, maybe eventually have enough to truly start over on my own terms." He was quiet for a long moment. "My ranch is not fancy. It is just me and 2 hired hands who live in the bunkhouse. The work is hard and the days are long, but you would have your own room in the main house and I would pay you fair wages." "That sounds perfect," Tessa said. "Are you sure? You just met me. You do not know anything about me." "I know you could have done terrible things last night and you chose not to," Tessa said. "I know you said I was worth more than gold when my own father said I was worth less than his gambling debts. That tells me more about your character than anything else could." Yates nodded slowly. "All right then. We will leave this afternoon if you are ready. It is a day's ride to the ranch." They left Mojave just after noon, Tessa riding a gentle mare that Yates had purchased for her. She had not been on a horse in years, but the skill came back quickly. They rode north through the desert landscape, the sun beating down mercilessly. Yates did not talk much, but his silence was comfortable rather than awkward. When they did speak, it was about simple things. The land, the weather, the best way to avoid rattlesnakes. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Yates pointed ahead. There. That is home. The ranch house sat in a valley between two rocky hills, a simple wooden structure with a covered porch and a stone chimney. Behind it were a barn, a corral with several horses, and the smaller bunkhouse Yates had mentioned. It was not much, but it looked solid and well-maintained. Two men emerged from the bunkhouse as they rode up. One was young, maybe 20, with sandy hair and a friendly face. The other was older, probably in his 50s, with leathery skin and sharp eyes. "Boys, this is Tessa Paulson," Yates said as they dismounted. "She will be working here as housekeeper and cook. Tessa, this is Danny Wright and Frank Morrison." Danny swept off his hat and gave a little bow. "Pleased to meet you, miss." Frank just nodded, his expression neutral. "Madam." "I will show you the house," Yates said. "Danny, can you take care of the horses?" "Sure thing, boss." The inside of the house was cleaner than Tessa expected, but it had the sterile feel of a place where no woman had lived in a long time. The main room held a table, some chairs, and a fireplace. There was a kitchen area with a cast iron stove and 3 doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. "That one is mine," Yates said, pointing to the door on the left. "That one was my parents' room. It is yours now. The third is just storage." Tessa opened the door to her new room. It held a bed with a simple quilt, a dresser, and a trunk. A window looked out onto the desert hills. It was plain but private, and it was hers. "It is perfect," she said softly. Over the next few weeks, Tessa fell into a routine. She woke before dawn to make breakfast for the men, then spent her days cleaning, doing laundry, mending clothes, and preparing meals. The work was hard, but it was honest work, and she found satisfaction in it. She was earning her own keep, building her own future. Yates was a fair employer. He paid her exactly what he promised, never asked her to do anything inappropriate, and treated her with quiet respect. She learned that his parents had died 3 years ago, his mother from fever and his father from a fall off a horse just 6 months later. He had been running the ranch alone ever since, building up the herd slowly but surely. Danny was friendly and talkative, always ready with a joke or a story. Frank was more reserved, but he warmed up to her after she made his favorite meal of beef stew and biscuits. Both men treated her with courtesy, and she never felt unsafe or uncomfortable. But it was Yates who occupied her thoughts more and more as the days passed. She found herself watching him when he did not know she was looking. The way he gentled a skittish horse with patient hands. The way he smiled, rare but genuine, when Danny said something particularly funny. The way he always made sure she was not working too hard, offering to help with heavy chores. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Tessa was washing dishes when Yates came in from checking on a pregnant mare. He looked tired, dust coating his clothes and face. "There is stew on the stove if you are hungry," she said. "And I heated water for washing up." "You are a blessing, Tessa Paulson," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her heart skip. She watched as he washed his hands and face, then ladled himself a bowl of stew. He sat at the table with a sigh of exhaustion. "Long day?" she asked. "They are all long days," he said. "But yes, this one especially. That mare is having trouble. I might need to sit up with her tonight." "I could help," Tessa offered. "I have helped birth foals before, back when my father still had his farm." Yates looked surprised. "I did not know that." "There is a lot you do not know about me," she said lightly. "Just like there is a lot I do not know about you. What do you want to know?" The question caught her off guard. She dried her hands on her apron, thinking. "Why did you really help me that night? The truth." Yates set down his spoon. "I told you the truth. It was the right thing to do. But there is more to it, is there not? I can see it in your eyes sometimes when you look at me. Like you understand something about what I went through." He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "My mother was sold by her family when she was 18, not in a card game, but sold nonetheless. They were immigrants, dirt poor, and they married her off to a man 3 times her age who paid them well for a young wife. That man was cruel. He beat her, treated her worse than his livestock." Tessa sat down across from him, her heart aching at the pain in his voice. "One day, my father came through town. He was a cowboy then, working cattle drives. He saw how that man treated my mother and he could not stand it, so he challenged the man to a horse race. If my father won, my mother would be free. If he lost, he would give up everything he owned. He won. He won, and my mother chose to go with him, even though she barely knew him. They fell in love on the trail north, got married in Sacramento, and built this ranch together. They had 30 good years before she got sick." Tessa felt tears in her eyes. "That is a beautiful story." "It is why I could not walk away from that saloon," Yates said. "I kept thinking about my mother and what her life would have been if my father had not been brave enough to step in. I saw you standing there, and I just knew I had to do something." "You saved me," Tessa whispered. "No," Yates said, meeting her eyes. "You saved yourself. You chose to be brave, to take control of your life. I just gave you the opportunity." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of shared understanding between them. Finally, Yates stood. "I should go check on that mare again." "You do not have to help if you would rather rest." "I want to help," Tessa said firmly. They walked to the barn together under a sky full of stars. The mare was indeed in distress, pacing her stall and breathing heavily. Tessa rolled up her sleeves and helped Yates examine her, their hands working in tandem. It took hours, well into the night, but finally the foal arrived, a little bay filly with a white star on her forehead. "She is beautiful," Tessa breathed, watching as the foal struggled to stand on wobbly legs. "She is," Yates agreed. But when Tessa looked over, he was not watching the foal. He was watching her. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them. Tessa felt it like a physical thing, this awareness that had been building for weeks finally breaking through the surface. She saw in Yates's eyes that he felt it too. "Tessa," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart was pounding. "What is it?" "These past weeks, having you here, it has changed everything. This house feels like a home again. I find myself looking forward to coming in from work, knowing you will be there. And I know I have no right to feel this way after everything you have been through. I know you probably see me as just your employer, and that is fine, but I needed you to know." "Know what?" she whispered, even though she already knew, already felt the same thing. "That I am falling in love with you," Yates said. "That every day I fall a little more, and if you do not feel the same way, I will never mention it again. You will always have a place here, a job here, no matter what." "But I had to be honest with you." Tessa stepped closer to him. "You think I do not feel the same way? Yates, I have been falling in love with you since that first night when you looked at me and saw a person instead of property, when you gave me my freedom instead of taking it away. How could I not love you?" The smile that broke across his face was like the sun rising. "You mean that?" "I mean it with everything I am." He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "May I kiss you, please?" she breathed. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it deepened as Tessa wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed closer. She had been kissed before, clumsy attempts by boys back home, but this was different. This was everything. This was fire and safety and coming home all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I will court you properly," he said. "I will do this right. I want everyone to know that you chose me of your own free will." "I do choose you," Tessa said. "I choose you every day." The courtship that followed was sweet and sincere. Yates brought her wildflowers from the hills. They took evening walks after dinner, talking about everything and nothing. He taught her to ride better, to rope a calf, to shoot a rifle. She taught him recipes her mother had passed down, songs from her childhood, how to dance in the kitchen when the evening light turned everything golden. Danny and Frank were openly delighted, taking every opportunity to tease Yates about being lovesick. Tessa blushed at their jokes, but she did not mind. She had never been this happy. 3 months after that night in the barn, Yates took her on a picnic to a spot high in the hills where wildflowers bloomed in riotous colors. The view stretched for miles, the ranch a tiny oasis in the vast desert landscape. "My father proposed to my mother on this spot," Yates said as they sat on a blanket eating fried chicken and biscuits. "He said it was important to show her the whole world they would build together." Tessa's breath caught. "Yates." He took her hands in his. "Tessa Paulson, you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You took the worst night of your life and turned it into a new beginning. You chose hope over despair, courage over fear. I want to spend the rest of my life watching you bloom, supporting you, loving you. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." The ring he slipped onto her finger had been his mother's, a simple gold band with a small ruby. It fit perfectly, as if it had been meant for her all along. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Mojave. Tessa wore a dress that Danny's sister had helped her make, simple white muslin with lace at the collar. Yates wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle alone. She had no family to give her away, but she did not need them. She was giving herself, freely and joyfully, to the man who had shown her what real love looked like. Frank and Danny stood as witnesses, along with several ranchers from neighboring spreads and some townsfolk who had heard the story of how Yates had won Tessa in a card game and fallen in love with her instead of treating her as property. It had become the stuff of local legend, and people looked at them with romantic admiration. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Yates kissed her, the small church erupted in applause and cheers. Tessa laughed against his lips, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by neighbors. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing as the sun set and the stars came out. Yates held Tessa close as they swayed to the music, and she felt like she was floating. "Happy," he murmured against her ear. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. That night, in the room that had been Yates's parents', now theirs, he made love to her with such tenderness and care that she cried. He kissed away her tears and held her close, and she finally understood what it meant to be truly cherished. The seasons passed in a blur of happiness. Tessa threw herself into making the ranch house a real home, adding curtains she sewed herself, planting a vegetable garden, even getting a few chickens. The ranch prospered under Yates's careful management, the herd growing steadily. In the spring of 1887, Tessa realized she was pregnant. She told Yates one morning at breakfast, unable to keep the news to herself any longer. The look of pure joy on his face was something she would remember forever. "A baby," he breathed, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair. "Our baby." He placed his hand on her still flat stomach with such reverence that Tessa felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. She seemed to cry at everything these days. "Are you happy?" she asked, even though she could see that he was. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he said, kissing her soundly. The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat made Tessa sick and tired, and there were days when she could barely keep food down. But Yates was attentive and patient, taking over many of her chores and making sure she rested. Danny and Frank pitched in too, with Danny attempting to cook meals that were barely edible but made with such good intentions that Tessa did not have the heart to criticize. In October, as the desert air finally began to cool, Tessa went into labor. The doctor from Mojave arrived just in time, and after 12 hours of hard work, she delivered a healthy baby boy with his father's blue-gray eyes and a shock of dark hair. "What should we name him?" Yates asked, cradling his son with the same gentle hands he used to calm wild horses. Tessa smiled tiredly. "What was your father's name?" James O'Brien. "Then we will call him James," she said, "so he knows where he comes from. Little James was a good baby, healthy and strong." Yates was a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring the baby to Tessa for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his deep voice that made both mother and child drowsy. Danny was completely smitten with the baby, offering to watch him whenever Tessa needed a break. Even gruff Frank softened around little James, whittling him toys and telling him stories even though the boy was far too young to understand. As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Yates hired another hand to help with the expanding herd, and he built an addition onto the house for what he hoped would be more children. Tessa had never forgotten the night her father sold her, but the memory had lost its power to hurt her. She had transformed that pain into something beautiful, into a life full of love and purpose. She had saved herself, just as Yates had said, and she was proud of that. One afternoon, when James was almost 2 years old, a rider came to the ranch. Tessa was hanging laundry when she saw him approach, and something about his hunched posture seemed familiar. As he got closer, her heart sank. It was her father. Thomas Paulson had aged badly. He looked at least 10 years older than he was, his face haggard and his hands shaking. He dismounted clumsily and stood there, hat in hand, not quite meeting her eyes. "Tessa," he said hoarsely, "I need to talk to you." Yates appeared from the barn, his face going hard when he recognized the man. "You have got some nerve showing up here, Paulson." "I know," Thomas said. "I know I do not deserve your time, but please just hear me out." Tessa looked at her father and felt nothing but a distant pity. This broken man had no power over her anymore. "Say what you came to say." Thomas took a shaky breath. "I am dying. The doctor says I have maybe 6 months, probably less. And before I go, I needed to tell you how sorry I am. What I did to you that night, it has haunted me every day since. I was drunk and desperate and stupid, and I treated you like you were nothing when you were everything. You were all I had left of your mother, and I threw you away like trash." Tears ran down his weathered cheeks. "I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not even deserve to ask. But I needed you to know that I am sorry, that I know what I did was unforgivable. And that I am glad you ended up here, with a man who clearly loves you, instead of with one of those other bastards at that table." Tessa was surprised to find she felt tears on her own cheeks. "Why did you do it? Really?" "Because I am weak," Thomas said simply. "Because I could not face my failures without whiskey, and I could not stop gambling even when I had nothing left to lose. Because I am a coward who destroyed everything good in his life." "You did," Tessa agreed. "You destroyed our family. You destroyed my trust. You made me believe I was worthless." "You are not worthless," Thomas said urgently. "You never were. That is my sin making you feel that way." Tessa looked at Yates, who stood with his arms crossed, watching the exchange carefully. She thought about the life she had built, the love she had found, the child she had born. She thought about who she had been and who she had become. "I cannot forgive you," she said finally. "Not completely. What you did was too terrible, but I can let go of my anger. I can stop letting that night have power over me, and I can acknowledge that if you had not sold me, I never would have met Yates. So in a strange way, your worst act led to my greatest blessing." Thomas nodded, seeming to accept this. "That is more grace than I deserve. Thank you." "Where will you go?" she asked. "I have a cousin in Sacramento who said I can stay with him for whatever time I have left. I wanted to see you before I went." Tessa walked into the house and came back with a small pouch of money. "Take this. It is not much, but it is enough to get you there and maybe see a doctor." Thomas stared at the pouch like it was a snake. "I cannot take your money, Tessa." "Yes, you can," she said firmly. "Not because you deserve it, but because I do not want to wonder if you died cold and alone on the road. Take it and go. Live what life you have left with some dignity." Her father took the money with shaking hands. "You are a far better person than I ever was." "I know," Tessa said simply. After he left, Yates wrapped his arms around her from behind, holding her as she processed the encounter. "Are you all right?" "I am," she said, and she meant it. "I really am. He has no hold on me anymore. He is just a sad old man who made terrible choices. You were generous to him." "I was generous to myself," Tessa corrected. "I do not want to carry that bitterness anymore. I want to be free of it completely." Yates turned her in his arms and kissed her forehead. "You are an extraordinary woman, Tessa O'Brien." She smiled at the sound of her married name. It still gave her a thrill, even after all this time. "I had a good teacher in letting go of the past and embracing the future." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching James toddle around the yard chasing chickens, Tessa felt a profound sense of peace. Her father's visit had been a gift in its own way, a chance to close that chapter of her life completely. 2 years later, Tessa gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose after Yates's mother. She was a beautiful baby with her mother's dark hair and her father's smile. James was an attentive big brother, always wanting to help feed the baby or rock her cradle. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Yates's reputation as an honest dealer and skilled rancher spread, and he was able to command good prices for his cattle. They hired more hands and built a new barn. Tessa's garden expanded to include fruit trees and berry bushes. In 1892, when James was 5 and Rose was 3, Tessa found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she delivered a healthy baby boy they named Samuel. With 3 children running around, the house was full of noise and laughter and love. One evening, after the children were all in bed, Tessa and Yates sat on the porch swing they had installed, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "You ever think about that night in Mojave?" Yates asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes," Tessa admitted, "but not the way I used to. Now when I think about it, I think about how it was the night my real life began, the night I met you. I knew the moment I saw you that you were special," Yates said. "I could not explain it then, but I knew. It was like something inside me recognized something inside you. You said I was worth more than gold," Tessa remembered. "No one had ever said anything like that about me before." "It was true then, and it is true now," Yates said. "You are worth more than all the gold in California, all the cattle on the range, all the land from here to the ocean. You are my whole world, Tessa." She turned to kiss him, a kiss that still held all the passion and tenderness of those early days. "And you are mine." The years continued to pass in a happy rhythm. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the horses. Rose was spirited and fearless, always getting into mischief. Samuel was the baby, sweet and affectionate, always wanting cuddles. In 1895, Tessa delivered her 4th child, another girl they named Clara. The house was bursting at the seams now, full of children and love and chaos. Danny had married a girl from town and built his own small house on the ranch property. Frank had passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 62, and they had buried him on the hill where the wildflowers grew. Tessa sometimes thought about what her life might have been if things had gone differently that night in the saloon. If the businessman had won the card game instead of Yates, if she had been too afraid to accept Yates's offer of freedom, if she had run away instead of asking to work for him, but those alternate paths held no appeal. This was her life, the one she had chosen, the one she had built from the ashes of her worst moment. She was exactly where she was meant to be. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Tessa back to the hilltop where he had proposed. They left the children with Danny and his wife and rode up through the wildflowers, which were in full bloom. "I wanted to come back here," Yates said as they dismounted, "to remember how this all started. With you asking me to marry you and me saying yes so fast I barely let you finish the question," Tessa laughed. "I brought you something," Yates said, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a small wooden box and handed it to her. Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a pendant in the shape of a wild rose. "Yates, it is beautiful. The jeweler in Sacramento made it special for me," he said. "I wanted to give you something that symbolized what you mean to me. Roses are beautiful, but they have thorns. They are delicate, but they are strong. They grow wild and free, just like you." Tessa felt tears spring to her eyes as he fastened the necklace around her throat. "I love it. I love you. I have loved you since that first night," Yates said. "When I looked at you standing in that saloon and saw not a victim, but a survivor. When I saw your strength and your courage even in your darkest moment. I knew then that if I could win that card game, I would spend the rest of my life proving to you that you were worth everything. Worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth loving. You have proved it every day," Tessa said, framing his face with her hands. "Every single day for 10 years. You saved me, Yates, but not in the way people think. You did not save me by winning that card game. You saved me by seeing me as a person, by giving me a choice, by loving me for who I am." They made love there on the hilltop, in the wildflowers under the wide blue sky, and it was as sweet and passionate as their wedding night had been. As the years continued to roll by, their family grew and changed. James turned 18 in 1903 and began taking on more responsibility around the ranch, showing the same steady leadership his father possessed. Rose, now 16, was being courted by the son of a neighboring rancher, much to Yates's dismay and Tessa's amusement. Samuel, at 11, was already showing an aptitude for working with horses that rivaled his father's. And Clara, the baby at 8, was as bright and curious as a new penny, always asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. Tessa looked in the mirror one morning and saw gray beginning to thread through her dark hair. She was 37 years old now, not the frightened 19-year-old girl who had been sold in a card game. Lines had appeared at the corners of her eyes, marks of all the years of laughter and tears. Her hands were rough from work, her skin tanned from the desert sun. She had never been happier. Yates came up behind her, his own hair showing silver at the temples, and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "How much I love my life," she said honestly. "How grateful I am for every moment of it, even the hard parts." "Especially the hard parts," she said, "because they brought me here to you, to our children, to this life we have built together." In 1904, James married a schoolteacher from Mojave, a smart and kind young woman named Alice. They had a small wedding at the ranch, and Tessa cried happy tears as she watched her eldest son pledge his life to the woman he loved. She thought about how different his story was from hers, how he got to choose freely without coercion or desperation. That was the gift she and Yates had given their children, the freedom to choose their own paths, to make their own decisions, to know they were loved unconditionally. It was the gift Yates had given her all those years ago, and she had never forgotten it. Rose married the neighboring rancher's son the following year, and Samuel began talking about going to veterinary school to learn the latest techniques for caring for horses and cattle. Clara announced she wanted to be a teacher like her sister-in-law Alice. Tessa supported all of their dreams, encouraging them to reach for whatever they wanted. She never wanted any of her children to feel trapped or limited by circumstance. In 1908, James and Alice made Tessa and Yates grandparents for the first time with the birth of a baby girl. Holding her tiny granddaughter, Tessa felt the circle of life complete itself. She had been given away by her father, saved by her husband, blessed with children of her own, and now she had grandchildren to love. What should we have them call us? Yates asked, peering down at the sleeping baby with wonder. How about Grandma and Grandpa? Tessa suggested with a smile. That makes us sound old, Yates protested. We are getting old, Tessa laughed. I am 42 and you are 49. We are grandparents now. We are allowed to be old. You will never be old to me, Yates said, kissing her cheek. You are still that beautiful young woman I saw in the saloon, the one who took my breath away. And you are still my cowboy who said I was worth more than gold, Tessa replied. More grandchildren followed over the years. Rose had 3 children in quick succession. Samuel eventually did go to veterinary school and came back to help run the ranch with the most modern techniques available. Clara became a teacher in Mojave and married one of her fellow teachers, a gentle man who loved her fierce intelligence. In 1915, Tessa and Yates celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. They were both silver-haired now, their faces lined with age and experience, but the love between them had only grown stronger with time. The ranch was thriving, run now by James and Samuel working in partnership. Yates had officially retired, though he still liked to ride out and check on things. Tessa had handed over most of the household duties to Alice and spent her days spoiling her grandchildren and working in her beloved garden. On the evening of their anniversary, after all the family had left from the celebration, Yates took Tessa's hand and led her out to the porch. The sun was setting in a blaze of glory, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. 30 years, he said softly. The best 30 years of my life. Mine too, Tessa agreed, though I could not have imagined it that first night when you walked into that saloon and changed everything. Do you know what I remember most about that night? Yates asked. What? The way you looked at me when I said you were worth more than gold, like you did not quite believe it, but you wanted to. Like you were desperate for someone to see your value when everyone else had dismissed it. Tessa nodded. That is exactly how I felt. I spent every day since then trying to prove it to you, Yates said. Trying to show you that you were worthy of love and respect and everything good in this world. You succeeded, Tessa said, squeezing his hand. You succeeded beyond measure. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. Children who love me, grandchildren who adore us, a home full of laughter and warmth. But most of all, you gave me yourself. Your love, your loyalty, your partnership. That was the greatest gift of all. I am the one who received the gift, Yates said. You transformed my life too, you know. This house was so empty before you came. I was just going through the motions, working the ranch because it was what I knew how to do. You brought life back into this place. You made it a home again. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Tessa thought about all the years behind them and whatever years remained ahead. She thought about the scared girl she had been and the confident woman she had become. She thought about the power of choice, the strength of love, and the possibility of redemption. "I forgave him, you know," she said suddenly. "Your father." "Yes. I never told you, but after he died, I got a letter from his cousin. He said my father spent his last month sober trying to make amends for his life, and he asked me to forgive him. I wrote back and said I did." "Why did you not tell me?" "Because I needed to do it for myself, not for anyone else," Tessa explained. "I needed to let go of that last bit of anger I was holding on to. He made terrible choices, but he was still human. Still flawed and broken and trying his best, even if his best was not very good." Yates pulled her close. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I have ever known." "I learned from the best," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "In 1918, the world was embroiled in a terrible war overseas. Samuel enlisted despite Tessa's fears, determined to do his part. The months he was gone were agony, but he returned safely in 1919, changed by what he had seen but whole in body. The 1920s brought new challenges and new joys. The ranch adapted to changing times, with automobiles beginning to replace horses for some tasks. Tessa watched her grandchildren grow up in a world very different from the one she had known as a young woman. Women could vote now, something that filled her with quiet satisfaction. In 1925, Yates fell ill with pneumonia. For 3 terrifying weeks, Tessa sat by his bedside, holding his hand and willing him to fight. Their children took turns keeping vigil, and the house was full of quiet prayers and desperate hope. Yates pulled through, but he was weakened by the illness. The doctor said he needed to take it easy to let his body recover. Tessa fussed over him like a mother hen, making him rest and feeding him nourishing soups. "You are being ridiculous," Yates grumbled one afternoon. "I am fine." "You are not fine, you stubborn man," Tessa retorted. "You nearly died, so you are going to rest and recover if I have to tie you to that bed." Yates smiled despite his irritation. "Still bossing me around after 40 years of marriage." "Someone has to," Tessa said. "Otherwise you would work yourself into an early grave." He reached for her hand. "I am not ready to leave you yet. We still have too much living to do." "Good," Tessa said fiercely, "because I am not ready to let you go either." Yates did recover, though he never regained his full strength. He accepted his limitations with grace, spending his days in a rocking chair on the porch, watching the ranch operations and offering advice when asked. Tessa stayed by his side, reading to him, talking with him, simply being present. They had built a life together from nothing, had survived trials and celebrated joys, and they were not done yet. In 1930, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary. The family gathered at the ranch, 3 generations strong. There were over 20 grandchildren now, and even a few great-grandchildren. The house overflowed with love and laughter. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Tessa and Yates sat on the porch under the stars, wrapped in blankets against the cool desert night. 45 years, Tessa marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together." "I cannot remember my life before you," Yates said. "Or rather, I do not want to. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Tessa O'Brien." "And you are mine," she said. "My cowboy who saw my worth when no one else did, who loved me when I did not know how to love myself, who built this beautiful life with me one day at a time." "Do you have any regrets?" Yates asked. Tessa considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "Not even the painful parts, because they shaped who I became. I would not change anything if it meant I would not end up here with you, with our family." "Not even that night in the saloon, especially not that night," Tessa said firmly. "Because that was the night I met you. The night everything changed. The night I learned that I was worth more than gold. Yates kissed her temple. You are worth more than all the gold in the world, my love. You always have been. They sat together in the quiet night, two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and created something beautiful. Their love story had started with a card game and a stranger's compassion, and it had blossomed into a lifetime of devotion. As the years continued to pass, Tessa and Yates grew older but never apart. They faced each challenge together, celebrated each joy together, and held each other close through everything life threw their way. In 1935, Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76. He died in the bed he had shared with Tessa for nearly 50 years, holding her hand to the very end. His last words were the same words he had spoken on their wedding day. I love you, Tessa, forever. Tessa grieved deeply, but she did not fall apart. She had loved Yates for 50 years, and that love had made her strong. She knew he would want her to keep living, to keep loving their family, to keep finding joy in the world. She stayed on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the man who had saved her and loved her and built this legacy with her. She made sure they knew about that night in Mojave, about how something terrible had transformed into something wonderful. Your grandfather always said I was worth more than gold, she would tell the youngest children. And he spent every day of our marriage proving it to me. That is what real love is. Not grand gestures or pretty words, but daily acts of devotion, choosing each other every single day. Tessa lived to be 81 years old, dying in 1947 surrounded by the family she and Yates had created. Her last coherent words were about him, about how she could see him waiting for her, young and strong and smiling. They buried her next to Yates on the hilltop where the wildflowers grew, where he had proposed all those years ago. The entire town of Mojave turned out for the funeral, along with people from all over California who had heard the story of the cowboy and the woman he had won in a card game and loved for a lifetime. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations. The O'Brien name became synonymous with integrity and hard work, values that Yates and Tessa had instilled in their children and grandchildren. The story of how they met, how Yates had said Tessa was worth more than gold, became family legend. It was told at weddings and anniversaries, a reminder that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that one person's courage can change everything, and that we all have the power to choose our own paths. The house where they had lived and loved and raised their family still stood well into the 21st century, maintained by their descendants as a tribute to the love that had built it. Visitors could still see Tessa's garden, now expanded and carefully tended. They could sit on the porch where Tessa and Yates had spent countless evenings watching the sunset. They could walk to the hilltop where wildflowers still bloomed every spring. And they could learn about the woman who had been sold by her own father, and the cowboy who had said she was worth more than gold, and how those two people had defied the darkness of that moment to create a lifetime of light. Their love story became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of redemption, the strength of the human spirit, and the transformative nature of true love. It proved that our worst moments do not have to define us, that we can choose to rise above our circumstances, and that sometimes the greatest love stories start in the darkest places. Tessa had been right when she told Yates she had no regrets. Because even though her journey had begun with betrayal and desperation, it had led her to everything she had ever wanted. A partner who cherished her, children who loved her, a home that was built on respect and affection, a life that was rich in all the ways that truly mattered. She had been worth more than gold, and Yates had made sure she knew it every single day. That was the legacy they left behind, written in the hearts of their descendants and in the very land they had worked together. It was a legacy of love, pure and simple, and it would endure long after both of them were gone. The story of Tessa and Yates O'Brien reminded everyone who heard it that we are all worth more than we sometimes believe, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that choosing courage in our darkest hour can lead us to our greatest joy. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, and worth passing down through the generations. And it all started on that fateful night in 1885, in a saloon in Mojave, California, when a desperate father made a terrible choice, and a brave cowboy decided to do the right thing. Everything that came after, all the love and laughter and life, flowed from that single moment of compassion and courage. Tessa had been sold by her own father, treated like property instead of a person. But Yates had seen her true value, had recognized her worth, and had spent his entire life proving to her that she was precious beyond measure. In doing so, he had not only saved her, he had found his own salvation. Because loving Tessa, being loved by her in return, had given his life purpose and meaning. Their story was proof that even in the wild, lawless West, even in an era when women had few rights and fewer choices, love could still triumph. Compassion could still win. And two people, thrown together by chance and circumstance, could build something beautiful that would last not just for their lifetimes, but for generations to come. The ranch continued to thrive under the care of their descendants, each generation adding their own chapter to the family history, while honoring the foundation that Tessa and Yates had laid. The values they had lived by, integrity, hard work, compassion, and devotion, became the bedrock upon which the entire family was built. And every spring, when the wildflowers bloomed on the hilltop where two people were buried side by side, the family would gather to remember. They would tell the story again, making sure the youngest members knew where they came from and what their family stood for. They would talk about the woman who had been worth more than gold and the man who had made sure she knew it. It was a love story for the ages, born in darkness but flowering into light. It was a reminder that we all have the power to change someone's life, to see their worth when others do not, to choose compassion over cruelty. And it proved that real love, the kind that lasts a lifetime and beyond, is built not on grand romantic gestures but on daily choices to honor, respect, and cherish the person you have promised yourself to. Tessa and Yates O'Brien had lived that kind of love, and in doing so, they had created something that would never die. Their love lived on in their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and all the generations that followed. It lived on in the ranch they had built together, in the land they had worked side by side, in the house where they had raised their family. But most of all, it lived on in the story itself, the tale of how a cowboy walked into a saloon and saw a woman's worth when everyone else saw only property. How he had gambled everything on a card game and won not just the hand, but the love of his life. How together they had built something lasting and true. That was the real legacy of Tessa and Yates O'Brien. Not the ranch, not the money, not even the large family they had created. Their legacy was the love they had shared, the example they had set, and the proof they had given that even in our darkest moments, redemption and joy are possible if we have the courage to reach for them. Their story ended where it had begun, in love. But it was not a sad ending because they had lived fully, loved completely, and left behind a legacy that would endure. They had proven that we are all worth more than gold, that love can conquer even the worst circumstances, and that choosing compassion and courage can change not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone who comes after us. And so the story of the woman who was sold by her own father and the cowboy who said she was worth more than gold became immortal, a testament to the enduring power of love and the indomitable strength of the human spirit. It was a story that would be told and retold, each generation finding new meaning in it, new hope, new inspiration. Because in the end, that is what love stories are for. They remind us of what is possible, of what we can achieve when we choose love over fear, compassion over cruelty, hope over despair. Tessa and Yates had made those choices every day of their lives together, and in doing so, they had created something that would never fade. Their love was eternal, written in the stars they had watched together, in the land they had worked together, in the family they had built together. And as long as there were people to tell their story, to remember their names, to walk the land they had loved, Tessa and Yates O'Brien would live on, proof that true love never dies.